At the end of this week, you have to turn in a synthesis map for Project 3A, and this is a task that you should do after you've completed your annotated bibliography and found several new sources to add to your research for Project 3A. I'm going to walk you through how I might get started on a task like this so that you can kind of have a model for how to do this. I'm going to do this digitally on a PowerPoint slide because there are some shape and text tools that could be useful there. But you could do this activity on paper. Typically, I do it on paper. Just for the ease of this video, I wanted to do it online. So feel free to just get a few pieces of paper out and start sketching ideas while you watch the video, or be ready to do that right after. So the purpose of this synthesis map is to help you think about how your sources are fitting together. One major difference between Project 2 and Project 3 is the way that you organize your sources. In Project 2A, you typically discussed your sources one by one as you found them. That is, like, you started with a research question and got into the library databases or went into the internet and did some searching and found a source and thought about what you learned from it, and then went and looked at another source and wrote about that. That works for the iSearch paper because that project is really a research narrative. It's to trace your process. But Project 3A is your presentation of an argument. And in that project, you won't look at sources one by one. Instead, you'll group them as they help you organize your ideas and support your subclaims. So you look at sources in categories. Sometimes many sources in one paragraph are in conversation with each other. The synthesis map task is to help you figure out how different sources in your working bibliography and annotated bibliography talk to each other. So I'm going to come back to an example that I started looking at in the other video for this week, this article that some of my colleagues and I are working on. Right now we have a fairly detailed outline for the article, and underneath our outline we have our working bibliography, which is a list of several sources that we're probably going to use. And we're working in a few different spaces. So right now we have a few annotated bibliography notes here, but then some of them are in a different place in OneDrive. So we kind of are still at the point of having to put it all together. But we have, this list of sources, and up here in the outline itself, I've started plugging in where I think some of these sources go. So actually, this is something you would do like after you've done synthesis mapping, but I can still use this as an example. I'm working to address this claim that I have in bold here and have replaced on this PowerPoint slide. Here's my tentative claim. Embracing the identity of peer mentors as administrative advocates recognizes a shift toward program administration that relies more heavily on non-tenure track labor and thus must design responsive, flexible, and sustainable systems. So that's the thing I'd like to say, but I can't just say it in a research paper. I can't just make my argument and be like, I think this is a good idea. I have to show two things. One, what have other scholars in my field, or in the field that I'm studying, already said about this? And then two, how did those ideas help me support my claim? So if I'm looking at my outline and at my sources, I can see that there are a few categories of ideas that I need to be able to demonstrate. And I need to be able to look at sources that talk about professional mentoring, because one of my tasks is peer mentors for graduate students, part-time and non-tenure track faculty members. I also know that some of my sources talk about teacher evaluation processes and revision of those processes. In a second, I'll draw a line from here to here because teacher evaluation processes are part of that professional mentoring. Another part of my claim is that the labor force in higher education is shifting to non-tenure track faculty, or a heavier presence of non-tenure track faculty. And then I want to look specifically at administrative systems and composition programs. So already kind of just in talking through that, I can see that I've got two more major ideas. This is a bigger idea, and this is a big idea. So two big ones. Professional mentoring for grad students being the biggest one, but that some of these ideas are very specifically connected to each other. So I want to connect those two. And just in talking through it out loud, I can see that, this is a subset of this topic right here. So those lines will help me show that a little bit better. So I've got some main topics I want to talk about, but I also want to think about where the sources that I have in my working bibliography, where do they even fit in this larger puzzle? Now I've already plugged some of this in, and read some of these sources. I haven't read all of them because when we work collaboratively, sometimes we take turns reading the sources and then eventually we get to them. But I'd really be able to do the synthesis map fully after I had read more. I can tell just by looking at my annotations here and by at the title that Laura Davies is talking about a few different things in this. One, she's talking about documenting writing program systems, but she's also talking specifically about teacher evaluation. So I know that Davies, for me, is probably going to go in two places, and I'm just going to tag her on here. I know she talks about teacher evaluation processes. I'm going to put her here. And I know that she talks about administrative systems and composition programs specifically. So I'm going to add her over here too. Okay. And specifically about administrative systems and composition programs, she says we should keep a history of these programs. It's not enough just to tag which articles fit or which authors fit where. But what are their main ideas? Like what main point fits with that? Now I probably want to mess around a little bit with font size just to make this work so that I can fit all of my ideas in here, because once I start adding notes, it's going to take up a lot of room. Specifically here, how does she fit here? She gives examples. Watch me flounder with this a little bit. I think she's writing about Syracuse University and some other teacher evaluation process examples. Okay, so I'm going to add around here, like, what does this author have to say about this thing, so I can start to see where there are some similarities and differences. So if I look at the Janet Heller article that I talked about in the other thing, she is also looking at some key ideas. She is thinking about peer review, and not peer review the way you guys do it in class, but peer review where faculty members weigh in on each other's performance, which has to do with getting promotions and things like that. So her major argument is that non-tenure track or non-tenure line faculty should get involved in shaping policies and procedures. So I'm going to add her up here. Evaluation procedures. Just so I can get, like, what's one of her major parts of her argument. Okay. As I'm continuing to read through my sources, I want to see, do other authors agree with her on this point? For example, there is an author named Denise Comer who looks at dialogue in the teacher evaluation process. So it's not looking at how it's not just a top-down evaluator to evaluated person process, but that both people can learn. So there's some conversation that those two might have with each other. And I'll continue to add my sources in around here, both so that I can see how I might start organizing paragraphs, but also so I can see where I need to do more research. So for example, I'm making this claim that there's a shift in the labor force in higher education and specifically in English departments, mainly based on my prior knowledge, but not on research. So it's a thing that I know is happening because of experience, but I can't just say it's a thing that I know is happening. I have to be able to demonstrate that it's happening more than just in my program, but in other places. So as I start to fill this in, I might see, like, I really don't have a lot of sources here, and that's a clear empty space where I need to do some more work. Again, you can decide to work on this digitally. I think PowerPoint's really helpful for it. I'm going to have to mess around with font size a lot, but I can make my bubbles bigger and smaller, make my font bigger and smaller, and see which ideas are starting to take over. It might be as I work on this process that ultimately I find that maybe one of these sections really isn't as important as I thought it was. So I might even just get rid of it, or something might become more interesting to me and I have to shift my claim a little bit. So pay attention to those things happening as well. And feel free to add, any other notes or questions you have on your synthesis map as you wrap up for the week.